We're going to be covering some techniques that are pretty drastically different than what Brandon was covering. Not going to be diving into any synths. We're just going to be covering some ways that you can use routing and plugins to get some pretty cool results. I'm going to be using Pro Tools for this example, but you could use this in any DAW you want. What we're looking at here is basically, I use this as a way to usually start my building block sessions when I'm trying to figure out ideas of what will work, but I also use it as a compository method. Once I've created all my building blocks, I'll use this session to mash them all together, similar to how Brandon was using Whoosh to come up with accidental results, things that will basically surprise me and will be really useful at some point. But the way I have this laid out, we'll look at the routing first, is if you're familiar with how vocoders work at all, that's kind of how I was thinking when I went about setting up this session. I wanted basically a modulator signal to control multiple tracks of carrier signals in order to create interesting sound design results. Some of you may be familiar with this method, but I really tried to think of it in a way that would work really well for our League of Legends pipeline. So right here, we have this modulator track, and on it, I have Lux Fire Hard. This is from our Elementalist Lux skin, and I like using this sound because it has a very hard transient. You can take a listen here. Super hard hitting, really good as just a bass foundation for impact since it's overall pretty neutral, but it hits hard. On this track, I also have a gate. What this gate is basically doing is making it so that I'm only hearing the first little chunk of this impact. That makes it so that I can add more interesting details onto the tail of it. You can hear what it sounds like without it. Just kind of a drawn out tail, which is fine for what it is. Let's see. So reactivating that gate and diving more into the routing of this. By default, you might have noticed I had this at just completely muted volume, but on our sends here, we actually have a pre-fader send that is sent to the sidechain of all the gates on these carrier signals. So by making this pre-fader, it means that even though that this volume can change, this original signal will still get sent to all of the gate plugins. And the goal of that is to basically have nothing play on these tracks until a sound is played on this modulator track. You can see all of them light up as soon as this sound comes in, and then they go away once the sound is dying. We can hear what that sounds like with just this activating with some of Brandon's new magic. We're gonna do all of our examples for this utilizing some of Brandon's building blocks that he created in the previous examples. So hearing what this sounds like alone. So not great, but we're going to be doing a lot of things to actually make this sound cool. That's just kind of showing specifically the functionality of how this works. So first of all, what I'm going to kind of go through my thought process around how I would set up this session and make it sound good. The first thing I would identify is like, hey, we probably need some compression on this track because it's just not that loud and it's got some pretty drastic volume fluctuations. So already sounding a lot better. Usually with tonal content, I'm going to slap a verb onto it so that it sits better in the mix. Cool. So that's going to be our foundation. We're making ice magic specifically for the new character. What I would add next into here, looks like I got some more new building blocks. Blizzard, some low bassy wind. And what you'll typically notice with this session is that sometimes the way things line up is working really well. Sometimes the way they line up doesn't produce very good results. I'm totally fine with that because in my mind, as long as one of these sounds really good, that's going to make it a useful sound file. Most of the times when I'm doing building blocks, I'd say maybe 70% of the stuff doesn't end up being particularly useful for the project that I'm working on, but it might be useful for someone else on the team, or it might be useful for a different project down the line. It's just a good way of exploring, finding different ways to create useful content. So we're going to continue adding layers onto this example, basically fleshing it out and adding depth until it's something that we feel comfortable printing and sharing. So we're going to add some more new building blocks to this. We got some crystal glare sounds. So pretty similar to some of the stuff that Brandon was showing earlier. Very bright. We got some comet reverb on it. Cool, so we got some pretty decent results in there. We're going to continue fleshing this out though. Now we have some building blocks from our cosmic thematic. Let's take a listen to what this sounds like. There's some lower frequency howling wind type textures. This will fit in good because we're kind of lacking any low end energy into this, so this will make it feel like a more full sound. Yeah, you can hear like the way that those triggers, not super great. That won't be too useful, but it's fine. Cool, so we're building this out, continuing to add more. Now we got some Kiana ice building blocks. Thank you, Brandon, for those. Let's take a listen to that solo. Some verbed out ice crackles that'll help give us a more icy texture. Let's hear what this sounds like later on in the session as well. Hear the variety we're gonna get. Yeah, like that right there, that's a pretty good sample. That's something that I could totally build a sound off of. That's kind of what we're looking for in these. Sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it's not. That's fine. And then we'll add our final two layers here. We got some dark cosmic gin. Sounds like some reverse crystal layers. Cool. And then we'll get our final layer in here. This is just a motion-based whoosh layer. I like adding these type of things to a lot of my building blocks. I always like introducing both dynamic motion and frequency motion to make sound effects more interesting. So here by itself, we got a pretty beefy whoosh. I like throwing Mondo Mod on just about everything. I really like it a lot. This is the setting that I have, getting a lot of stereo motion as well as some dynamic motion in there. And this type of stuff works really great for when you're making missiles for things, just feeling that motion of it through space. So all of this stuff combined together, this is what we're listening to. Pretty icy, pretty new. I think that'll work for this example. What I would do at this point, once I'm satisfied with how it's sounding altogether, I would print this out. Once I would print out a single example of it, what I would most likely do is this aux here, this is basically a sum of all of these tracks. I might try some additional processing onto here to get a different variety of the same assets. If that's not getting me good results, then what I'll probably do is swap out certain assets. I know that like this is my kind of core tonal layer. I could swap that out for a different tonal layer and have something very similar, but also different that may come in handy when I'm designing things to picture later on. So this is an example of just using some pretty basic functionality that comes with all DAWs. I like to show this first because you don't need any fancy software in order to pull this off. Just about anyone can use this right away. While some of the examples I'm about to run they use some software that you actually have to pay for. And it gets a little bit trickier. This is good for just understanding the functionality of it though, and anyone can hop in and do this. Going into another example, before we listen, let's go over some new routing and new plugins that we're going to be using. So we talked about how we have the carrier sum. This is going to come in handy more for this example because it gives us more flexibility. All these carrier tracks are going to be feeding into here, and then this track feeds into a master track. In addition, this time we're going to have two S layers. S layer is a plugin made by Twisted Tools, and this gets us a lot of cool results with this method. These two S layers are going to go straight into the master. So basically what this routing does, it gives me individual control over the combined sum of these carrier tracks, and then I'll have additional control over the S layer volumes and any inserts I want to use. And then if I want, I have additional control over the sum of all the signals combined. It's really useful for once you actually get a cool sound, you can really start experimenting and trying different things with just plugins. So we're going to continue with our new example. We have the exact same tracks and sounds and settings that we did in the previous example, but this time we're going to be adding S layer to it. So let's go over quickly S layer. And again, we have the pre-fader send on this S layer track that's going to be modulating all of our signals. Whoopsies. So the briefest S layer overview that I can possibly give is this is in essence just a sampler, but what it offers is lots of randomization and customization options to spit out lots of unpredictable results. I utilize S layer a lot in my building blocks when I process a whole bunch of assets. Sometimes I'll just throw them in here to hear how they're all kind of mixing and blending together. But in this example, we're trying to explore what a magic might sound like for Nunu, and we're using S layer to add on depth and interest onto those layers. And in general, S layer works much better as a modulation signal than just having a static audio track. So just hearing what this S layer is going to sound like. So we got some pretty neutral ice layers. We got a mix of impacts and ice cracks and ice motiony whoosh layers. And we have a lot of those. To be precise, we have 55 of them. So going over some of the S layer parameters, this dial here, this is basically saying this is how many samples we have loaded into the sampler. And then these tracks here, this is basically combing through that number of samples. We have 8 different tracks, each one containing a different sample, which here is a randomizer that every time we press it, it's going to randomize which combination of samples is getting played. That is the base version of this. We do have reversal control. We can specify some of these to be reversed. For this sound, we're not going to do that. We can also reverse the start and delay. We're going to be adjusting the start time within the sample that's being played. It's going to randomize through almost the entire thing. This can just be tweaked to whatever you feel is working. This is going to be randomizing pitch within a pretty small range. I found that if you're doing too low and too high, it can get you less consistent results. And we're not going to be randomizing pan for this sample, but you can. And slight volume randomization. What I do recommend is experimenting with muting certain tracks. Depending on the content that you have, having all 8 samples play at the same time can get a little dense and get a little muddy sometimes too. So I'd recommend trying all 8 and then seeing if it's just too chaotic, just start muting some layers. You're still going to get randomization. So the whole point of this is we're going to be triggering this S layer while we're playing through these tracks. Now let's hear what that sounds like. you know what, I'll probably turn up my carrier signal a little bit more because Essler is a little loud. Cool, so we have that as our driving signal now. And what's useful about using this way is I can kind of visually see when interesting times to trigger the sound would be. And then I have a MIDI keyboard in front of me, and basically what I'll do is I'll program the randomizer button here to one key, and then I'll program the trigger one to another. So I'll usually hit randomize, and I'll say like, oh, that's actually a pretty good combination of samples. So I'm just gonna trigger that one over and over now. And then I'll comb through these sounds and get all the different variations of that with those tracks. What I'll do on top of this, rather than getting the exact same sample over and over, is we have these additional controls that we can use. And here we're gonna basically be combing through the start time of the file and then also the pitch. So what I'll do, not pointing through yet, is I have this sample, and then I can just kind of randomize the start where I have the same volumes, the same samples, the same pan information, but we're combing through all of those files. This is where it comes in handy, like having the whole length of the file here, because you can basically get all the different variations you have. And then in addition, we can control pitch on top of this. So some of those are going to sound better than others. Results may vary. But yeah, what I'll do is I'll play through this and I'll just keep kind of performing on top of it. I hit randomize a few times. And that's the gist of this. What I'll often do though is I'll actually have more than one S layer playing at the same time. I find this gets even more interesting results. And in this S layer, we have some ice crystal layers. Oops. And you'll notice this time we are reversing many of these. This just adds another icy element that's going to make this sound more interesting and cool. So let's hear what all of this stuff sounds like together. Comb through the start and the pitch. I feel like we can probably turn up this new tonal layer. So that's a pretty useful sample right there. This is sounding pretty solid. I'd feel comfortable printing this out, and then like I would do earlier, I'd start swapping out different tracks. I'd start adding different plugins onto different sum tracks and masters, and really trying to just experiment with this stuff. All right, so we're going to go into our final example. We're going to use all the things that we learned and apply it to more how I work on the personalization team, because this is something that I do at the start of every project. And this is going to be doing building blocks for a thematic. And in this case, the thematic is going to be project. We're going to make sound effects for a theoretical project Nunu skin. And I'll go through exactly what I would be thinking about during this process. So what I would usually do from the very start to just generate some ideas is I might take some Nunu building blocks that Brandon had already created, and I would probably start there just to hear what that sounds like. So listening to this sound, this is Nunu chimes, and we're gonna move the gate. Lots of character, lots of tonality, a really good sound to start from. We're going to activate this Pro G on it because we're going to be doing our S layer modulation again. We're going to have a manipulator here. I have a plugin preset that I'm using, Space Surf. Then we also have Valhalla Shimmer because I like putting verb on my tonal layers. So in our S layers, let's hear what we have going on here. So in this S layer, I have some building blocks that I made for the Mordekaiser update. So I made these specifically for his mace whooshes. It's a mix of really bright whip elements combined with some super compressed bassy whooshes. When it all lines up correctly, it sounds exactly like his mace does. Sometimes it doesn't sound good, sometimes it does. But this is going to be one of our control signals because it has a lot of motion. It sounds really good when you start layering it with other sounds. And in addition to that, we have some tech layers that we're going to be using in our other S layer. So we got some already project-like elements in there. We got some mecha impacts. This is going to make for a good sound to use to just kind of skip the line on sound design. We're going to get pretty close to our results just with these two things alone. That's already sounding pretty project, but we're trying to make project new building blocks, not just project general building blocks. We do both actually when we're doing building blocks on personalization. So let's hear what these two S layers sound like along with our modified new sound. So that's pretty sweet. Like I could probably just print that and call it a day, but I already put all these other tracks, so we're gonna play through all of them. So here we have some Project Ash, cool lasery elements. We also have some Yasuo layers in here, Odyssey Yasuo. Really bright motion layers. This was used for the sword of Odyssey Yasuo. Adding on further, we have some more Project Ash building blocks. Building on top of that further, we have some Echo building blocks as well. So all these things playing together. Let's hear what this sounds like without any of the S layers combined. So we've muted both these now. They're pre-fader send, so we're still getting that same signal. So that's some pretty cool sci-fi sound design, and we did it pretty fast there. That's all I'm going to cover today. There's a lot more in depth when you want to dive into each plugin and even the Pro G settings that I have here. I could talk about that further, but for the intents and purposes of this talk, just going over the creative parts of sound designing using this method. So that's all I got. Brandon, is there anything else you want to add before we take off?
I just want to say thanks for this opportunity, and hopefully you find these skill sets useful in your future endeavors. And thanks again.
Thanks for taking a listen to our talk here. And yeah, all right, goodbye.